I am DM Zone, this is Gamer's Oasis. Let's get into it. Deep in the primeval swamps of Lake Gloomy, shrouded in a perpetual mist, lies a city of the Brothers of the Swamp. For many years, this past religious order has delved into the forbidden areas of study and determined that animals have more potential to populate the world than man, who, after all, was a biological abomination which would ultimately threaten the existence of all life. That was the introduction into the Temple of the Frog, which is often mistaken as one of the first adventure modules, but what I really feels like is more of a campaign setting, like a world setting, more so than an adventure module. There is adventure within there, but this is bigger and greater than that. Let me explain what I mean. This Temple of the Frog has several elements to it. One is the passing of time. There is a history there that is deep and rich, that tells a story from one point, goes to another. It has multiple origins that come together to meet in a certain location to continue, I guess, a shared existence, if that makes sense. There are also several factions within these groups. Some of these factions have rivals both within their own faction, and they have enemies within their own faction, and then they have rivals and enemies outside of their faction. There's also more than one truth. So something can be true in one way from one person's perspective, and then true from another person's perspective, because they have a different perspective. The complexity you find in this does not lend itself well to something that would be a one-shot or that would be really like a short adventure. Though I have seen a group that has turned it into a one-shot using 5th edition rules, and I thought that was pretty interesting. So what would adventure look like in this setting, in this area? Well, this is a very small part of the world. It's set basically on the edge of a swamp where a city is, and there's an ancient cult that has these ruins. There's a nihilistic cult within those ruins called the Temple of the Frog. They believe that humanity, or really humanoids in general, are the downfall of everything of the nature of the natural world, and that animals, and particularly frogs, are going to be the thing that moves it forward. The reality is there's several things that are being misrepresented. There is a power literally genetically altering the DNA of frogs. Long before Jurassic Park was a good idea to make a dinosaur movie, these things were actually happening in this module. They developed some sort of strain with the cultists that would combine the ferocity of the larger creatures with the ability to move through the swamp with a quickness and a swiftness to avoid unnecessary interactions with humanoids while they did their retaliation or attacked certain things, shall we say. These frogs don't necessarily sound overly terrifying at first. They grow to be about 2 feet in length, which is a massive frog for sure. And they have, for some reason, razor sharp teeth that would be able to shred a person. And they have a pretty high level of intelligence, like enough that you can convince them to go assassinate someone, or at least try to assassinate someone, and they'll be able to identify one human from another human to be able to do that. So these breeding pits that these giant or large or maybe killer frogs are bred is sort of the backdrop to the campaign. In many specific and special ways, this influences a lot of how the world around them interacts with them. For example, there's a large metal image of a frog that has been set up in front of a ramshackle-like temple. Now, this temple is the old temple, but it's still there in a way. And the Lord of the Swamp is there and is sort of like the master of ceremonies. By dumping victims, i.e. people that have sort of been trafficked, shall we say, they refer to them a lot as slaves that were sacrificed down a circular opening at the base of the idol's feet, drops him into basically a breeding pit where the frogs feed. Now, they weren't very good at this. They probably tried a more naturalistic, holistic approach to the thing when they first did this. So many of the frogs ate themselves, being a little bit cannibalistic, and few of the frogs actually made it out of the breeding pits large enough to be useful. Now, these altered frogs developed sort of a taste for human flesh and blood, and they gained some ferocity. And these keeper of the frogs would take care of them and kind of direct them into doing things for them. And there was an inner circle, sort of a council, known as the keeper of frogs, who tend to these beasts in the depth of the temple that was there. And these are considered to be devoted followers. And there was a deception sort of between what they believe the frogs are versus maybe what the cultists who are not high-level priests think what the frogs are. Some people have their eyes more wide open and see them as tools and utility of power. Some of them see them as miraculous gift from the gods that they are blessed with, and that is truly a sacrifice and a generosity to have these, to bring these things into existence. There was also some discontent because the keeper of the frogs were supposed to be doing bigger and more frogs, and the frogs kind of had like a lower fertility rate. They were cannibalistic, and many of them did not make it to adulthood. So a group within this cult, the loyal brothers, shall we say, who were more of their eyes were fixated on what this actually could be versus maybe what it really is, found themselves more devout. And they believe that the best way to do it is to seek out more and more slaves or sacrifices, however you want to view this, to be brought in so that they could have more frogs raised up. Now, they also had some alternative motives with skilled labor. If they could bring in people and got a hold of the trading routes and had traders come in, it would elevate them both in status and stature, and with the ability to build greater things. Several of these loyal brothers were often known as traders themselves and would travel in groups outside of the temple in groups of 3, sort of spy on each other to make sure they're maintaining the faith. And those that didn't often were fed to the frogs or were punished in some way. Now, these brothers take a great amount of effort to conceal the exact whereabouts of the temple, leaving the fear of its existence and what they and who they are there, but then not allowing people to be able to know exactly where it is so they could combat it. There was a nearby city, sort of a outlaw kingdom, shall we say, that was in the area that knew about the temple and really knew where it was. They kind of fed on the destruction nature of this nihilistic cult. As a generation or so went by, more people identified with the outlaw kingdom side of things than with the actual cult side of things. This slow collapse or fall from being such a devout group of people into something that became more of like a TV show revival where you have a person who's bigger than life that's trying to encourage people, and some people not really there for that. They're there for the food or whatever, the entertainment, found themselves in this weird way. Now, in the middle of, like I said, this fall where things were kind of falling out and things were not going well, and a lot of the groups were fracturing and splintering apart from each other, a powerful new leader joined the temple. No one knows exactly where he came from, but he was known as Stephen the Rock. Now, I've heard his name mispronounced or resaid several times, and they usually use like a Steve or Steven, and some people call him the Rockefeller or, whatever. I don't think there's some sort of copyright on that. I guess I'll find out. But I think the biggest part is the name Stefan is not a traditional fantasy name. And I think that's the most important part. And when he was found, or when he joined with two other people. And they don't really get into what their names are, but essentially they had very non-fantasy names too. Something like a Bob and like a William, maybe. So at first he joined the temple. He quickly moved through the ranks and became part of the inner council, the inner circle. When this happened, though, there were several that disagreed with his rise in power and some of his positions on things. These people ended up challenging basically Stefan the Rock in a way, and ended up being part of the sacrifices that would happen with these frogs. Some of them would be struck by lightning randomly or oddly when maybe there was or was not storms. And no one knows exactly why they were there, but everyone who basically dissented against him died. Now, when Stefan got into the inner circle, he quickly became the high priest. Things started to change rapidly. He was able to hire troops. These troops became fairly loyal. They were mostly driven by financial means. So you have the religious side of things. You have the religious side of things as kind of becoming like scummy outlaw type. And then you have the true believers who really believe in this nihilistic cult that humans aren't supposed to be the end leaders, that we are there to prop up these animals. So you have several things going on all at the same time. And then he kind of built up like a nest of vipers. They use that as sort of a descriptive term to say like people that were countercultural, not necessarily like an actual animal, vipers, or a group of people who refer to themselves as vipers, though I think that's a cool sounding gang. But these vipers were kind of sent to the bandit town, the outlaw kingdom that bordered the swamp area where they were and knew of their existence and really where they were at, as many of these locations were shared and they were basically neighbors. And they ended up getting into a large fight because the outlaw kingdom did not want the religious order, this cult, to take over their area. And in this massive fight, two of the companions, Bob and William, ended up being killed and died, leaving only Stefan the Rock behind, as well as a large portion of the town that was destroyed. With some of his vipers around, they were able to start rebuilding. Now, this didn't hit for very long, and they ended up growing way faster, and a lot became rebuilt. And when it was rebuilt bigger and badder and different and more flashy, and certainly with unknown resources because they didn't have the money for these things. And some of this stuff was imported in, and no one exactly knows where it came from. The temple itself went from basically a statue with a subterranean and a small, like, above ground, like, chapel to something that was 100 feet wide, 200 feet long, and 80 feet tall. Now, there were large gardens that left from the temple down to the water's edge through the area that would be considered the outlaw kingdom area, merging all this into one umbrella type of thing. These walls and the temples were all flanked with towers at both ends to protect access from the swamp into the temple. There is now a moat that was placed around the temple itself and a siege tower placed every 25 feet or so. This was to help protect the area while everything was being built, one would assume. And from an unknown threat, there was also a natural cove that was protected with massive walls and towers that were placed there around it, but yet still allowing that naturalistic cove to exist. The town was divided up into several sections. The lower sections, where the guards would end up staying and living, was mostly destroyed. There was a bandit chief that had a lot of power during this period of time, and though that person is long gone, some of that power still remains, and there are rebels that talk about getting it back to what it was, removing this element of the Temple of the Frog completely. And you see this represented in raiders that go through this area, trying to reclaim parts of it. And they kind of have like an underground network in this area. So most of the security in this area is provided by soldiers with the assistance of priests of the Frog. There's a new order of devoted that was dedicated to patrols and the securing of these areas. No more is it just 3 priests that travel with each other, but now it's soldiers with priests, making them far more effective and a lot more militant than they once were. These patrols are sent out to both keep the rebels in check, but to protect this area from outside influences. There is a lot less of a free-for-all atmosphere that was not directly talked about, but back when the temple was there initially, you can sense that that was there, and it talked about the fact that when Stefan took over and this war happened, that went away. Some of the other changes that happened when Stefan took over is that the temple became far more efficient. The frogs gained the appropriate name of killer frogs. They were now reproducing faster than ever, and the border regions often felt the sting if they approached too close to the swamps, as the swamp was now teeming with naturalistic enemies that would fight back. Though the scale of everything was far larger, it was still very hard to pinpoint exactly where the temple was, and that part was kept secret, but the fear of the temple was still there and was more widely known. There's a section of town that you can see here that's labeled as sleeping quarters for about 100 or so brothers. In these buildings are 15 by 15 with sparsely placed furniture, but what they do have within there are made from exceptional standards, especially for something you'd find in a swamp. Like the wood is mahogany, there are fur rugs of the finest fur, there are other durable and exquisite smaller items that would be useful in that setting. The gardens in these areas throughout this entire complex, I'm going to use the word complex now, are filled with singing birds of great color. And the gardens themselves are carefully tended. And where there are gardens, there tends to be fewer human patrols. I'm not saying it's not unguarded. I'm just saying that there are less obvious patrols walking around. On the eastern area of this map, there are the temple vestals, which are sort of maidens of the temple. These buildings tend to be 2 stories tall, made of complete stone, with small ventilation slits below the eaves of the roof to allow airflow. There's a dock along this side with a proper wall that's really massive and a huge 10-foot by 10-foot iron gate. These extra layers of protection and security stand out from other areas surrounding it, as maybe this area with the females, these maidens, might be more important. There's also barracks, which hold 40 men who are rotating between the different stages of alertness, either on duty, off duty, asleep, that type of stuff. Sometimes they're drunk, but basically having some sort of rotation if you're trying to run this makes a lot of sense. Now, if this sounds like, yeah, there's no way a party could do that, that's my point. That's why this is a campaign setting, not an adventurer module. If one was to go through this, you would literally have to have like a very stealthy mission for most of it, or go to war with this and then have that type of thing. But some of these areas, like this barracks area, they have collapsible shutters that block the windows that are made of iron. The roofs have these crenelages that protect you so you can be on top of the roof and have like the ability to have defense against arrows and this type of stuff. Even inside the barracks themselves, each one of them has at least a pit trap, which is kind of crazy. There's a lot of other buildings that are described, giving them purpose, the functionality, whether it's a mess hall or a kitchen or any number of things. What they're really trying to get at is that there's a lot of people here. I mean, when they talk about the southern part of the city, which retains many of the small wooden structures that were there initially and just kind of rethrown back up, that area alone holds 400 to 500 people. There's over 1,000 potential guards here at any point in time, as a minimum. The southern area is also a place where dissent still occurs. A revolt might actually happen at some point in time. The political influences of this bandit chief kind of still exists, though they can't fully get rid of them. Near that area, there's the docks, and in the dock area, there's far more guards than what most people would expect. It can hold up to 100 slaves at a time and 5 merchant ships worth of materials. The waters around here are actually able to handle merchant ships in places. So there are merchant ships that come in and out through this swamp into this now city area. And there is a per se seaward wall, which are 30 feet tall, 15 feet wide at the base, with huge 40-foot tall towers that have like catapults and siege engine type stuff, with huge gates that protect this area and drawbridges to prevent movement throughout this area, as well as many other security defensive measures that one could imagine being in there. There's normally 50 or so guards deployed. There's only 3 ships that are commonly there. One is literally permanently there, and then the other 2 come and go. But if they ever get a 4th ship in there, they just immediately put 50 more soldiers back there to help maintain peace. Now, actually getting to the proper Temple of the Frog, what it is now, would require probably a huge amount of stealth versus brawn. If I'm being completely honest, I think a attack on this place would be foolish unless you had a heap of knowledge of this area and you were probably higher level. And I'll get to why that is in a minute when I talk about magic items. So the actual temple, when you go into the actual proper temple, you can't ignore it. The doorway is 30 foot tall. It's massive and has this huge foyer going in there with up to 20 guards within that area alone. It has catapult, large drawbridge, and again, other security measures that you'd have to deal with as well. Now, it's not necessarily common knowledge, but the high priest of the temple was usually the most influential person of the inner circle. When Stephen the Rock showed up, all this basically changed, and he basically took that position, and influence be damned, basically. Now, behind the curtains, I guess, more, he was sent here actually from a different dimension, a different world than the one we live in the world of Blackmore. So that is why he has a different type of name, and all the people he came here with had a different type of name. He was sent here to police against insurrections and other beings from other dimensions coming, I guess, to his dimension or to this dimension. It's not really well explained what that exact purpose was. It just says he was here to police against it. However, even though they were coming over 3 at a time, when 2 of them died, Stephen was left there by himself, or maybe he took power by ending them. That part's not fully known, but what the party wouldn't know, but Stephen would know, is this was cloaked from his people, his actual people from the dimension he came from. And while this would not be something that was widely known, it could very well be used against him, because he probably comes from a group that would not appreciate the death of his 2 counterparts that were there to guide and to ensure that Stephen is doing the work of his people, essentially. Now, what makes me think that should even be brought up. Why would I even talk about the fact that Stefan is essentially an alien from a different world? Why would I even talk about that element of things? Well, that's because there are literally things here that can't be explained outside of that. Like his battle armor. This is such a loud statement of intent, shall we say, how sci-fi this has gotten, that is worth stating the previous part. There's also the mobile medical kit, which is not something you carry. It's actually like a 10 foot by 10 foot thing that you can walk through, and machines and things do things for you that are basically like that of a doctor. There are special alarms and rings that allow access or that alert Stefan to the presence of people. Let me get more into the armor, and I'll dive into that real deep, and then that will answer some of the questions you might already have. So the armor appears to be like a set of +3 chainmail. It is neutrally fixed with 12-inch movement. So if you move less, you now move 12. If you move more, you move 12. There is no fatigue for the one wearing it. Your strength is changed to an 18-aught, so the highest strength a human can have. Their dexterity is changed to an 18, making them basically a theoretical max for a human. It offers complete protection against all types of energy attacks, charms, hypnosis, drain life, polymorph, decay, and it allows the wearer to communicate with the rings or the people who are wearing rings. It allows them to walk underwater, fly, and basically only physical damage to the wearer makes it through. Now, it does state that the suit of armor can only take 60 points of damage before it starts to take damage and not function properly. However, that's probably more of a tool to keep it out of the hands of the party versus allowing Stefan a chance to repair his own armor. Stefan also has a +3 sword that can do up to 6 lightning bolts a day, doing 20 points of damage each. The sword can detect metal and living creatures within 100 feet of it. It has a 20% chance greater of breaking an opponent's weapon, which is sort of an odd thing because many of the rules in the 1974 D&D didn't actually have weapon breaking. Only the man-to-man had that, and that was actually a chainmail thing set from before Dungeons & Dragons came out. Not to be outdone, though, is the shield. The shield is a +3 shield that has the ability to cast a ring of invisibility, 10-foot radius. This also protects against mental attacks, so like a charm spell and that type of stuff to those who are around it. It also basically gives energy resistance and magical resistance to everyone within 10 feet as well. The medical kit, which I talked about before, is not a small thing, it's a big thing. It's a medieval medical marvel, one could say, with the ability to put people back together again, doubling the healing rates. And it does a lot for things that you wouldn't expect to find in a D&D game, especially also from this time era. But basically it's talking about vaccines and the ability to cure diseases and this type of stuff. Ability, which I think means it floats and is able to be pushed around. There are communication modules, which I guess they're sort of egg-shaped with a chair inside it that seals and shuts in a way that protects its own environment. So you're not breathing outside air and this type of stuff. And you can be submerged below water and that type of stuff. There's enough room for 2 people to squeeze in it at one time, and for whatever reason it also allows you to teleport by voice command, and it understands and translates all languages. So it will translate into your language what you want to hear, and it understands all languages. It's kind of a remarkable, crazy thing. There are also these rings that I've talked about that are linked to the battle armor that allows the So I'm going to get into some of like what their specifics are. There are some that are more common than others. Like there's one specific one that is kept by the chief of the keepers, and it controls the killer frogs and the warm-blooded creatures in the area. It also has 4 other keeper rings, which it controls them too, kind of like one ring to rule them all. And those are able to keep track of things like the killer frogs and these frogmen hybrids, which they don't really get into in this book. It's sort of a thing that they left open. Now, if you were to look at Temple of the Frog, the book that came out later, they describe them as being green men that are alien, but they're basically frog human hybrids. Now, the Temple Guard also are able to have these rings. The commander gives access to all areas, of course, and are able to give orders to the rings below it. The only area it really can't enter is some of the keepers' areas where they have their own specific thing. But there's also an officer's ring and the sergeant's ring, giving them access to fewer areas, but more areas than the basic ring, shall we say. And again, these rings allow you to give orders, which basically would be treated like that of a command spell. So outside of the chain of command of the soldiers are the priest rings. Now, this kind of goes back towards the other one, but it's really its own third pathway. And in reality, it brings you to one ring that controls them all with the high priest. But there are priest rings, there are alkalite rings, which kind of do their own things like the soldiers' rings, but not exactly. I'm not trying to get into all the specifics. This video is going to be terribly long as it is, and I haven't really gotten to the describing of the area yet. What I will say is the soldier rings tend to deal with things the soldiers are in. So the upstairs, the defense, the battle stations, this type of stuff. The priest rings tend to deal things with the wall, like the battle stations in case they need. And it goes into the subterranean levels where the soldier rings do not work. Now the temple, the chapel, as I've been talking about, when you first go into that area, you're looking at 10 guards and a priest at minimum. It takes 2 guards and 2 priests at a minimum to open and shut the doors. And for the most part, church services or the chapel services are held during daytime hours only. The ground level, the first level of this, can hold up to 300 people on 20 different pews for a total of 300. Now, there's a huge amount of green stone in this area with gold leaf that surrounds a pit that takes you to a ritual location where people are sacrificed. Basically, instead of it being a small cylinder tube that went down to a breeding pit, it's now a more grand, more visual thing. Again, you still have the massive frogs and this type of stuff. There's a pulpit there that glitters with over 100,000 gold pieces and gems that are embedded into it, and a massive tapestry behind it that shows the eventual doom of man at the hands of nature and these nihilistic priests of the temple, as if this is a good thing. Now, I'm not trying to go through this place room by room. That'd be insane. It's safe to say that there are libraries with 10,000 books. There's a second floor that holds 300 people as well. There's a third floor with private viewing boxes called the Eyes of the Frog, and a massive group of machines that make dime store novel type trinkets that are often sold by the traders and barters of this area. There are prison cells. There's both the commander and the high priest headquarters upstairs on the 3rd level. And below this chapel, below this temple, there is a 2-level dungeon with over 18 rooms. There's an area that is known as the breeding island, which means that it has enough water on all sides of it, enough to call it an island. It's big enough to be called an island. This place is massive. In other words, there's no way I can talk about all of this in a video. if that makes sense. I've discussed a lot of things that can lead into things, but you can see here why this is more of a campaign adventure than an adventure module, a campaign setting versus you can see how this is more of a campaign setting versus an adventure model. Adventure models would come. You could certainly find an adventure module in there. In the video I watched, I talked about earlier where they played this module, but in 5e rules. Essentially, they're looking for a heroine of a great battle that was captured and brought here to be sacrificed. And I'm not going to go into their video and spoil what happened there. I will link to it though, so you can kind of get a feel for what they were doing in that video. There's not really a single thing that would draw a party, and there's a lot of little things. And if the party were to attach themselves to something like in the sandbox, they would find all the hooks they would need to get there. And I think that is a great way of looking at it and to do that type of thing. Like adding this to your world doesn't take away from it. It just gives that swamp a lot of character and probably fear. Now, I know that there were actual people who considered themselves so-and-so Temple of the Frog, like that was their character's name. This would allow in a permanent game setting for you to have your chaotic characters be able to play and for them to have purpose beyond that of I'm bad, I'm countercultural type of thing. And I think that is a really good thing, an interesting thing for a campaign where you want to have that type of stuff, which is definitely something that Dave Arneson, really the creator of this, what he wanted from it. Anyways, guys, did I get this right? Did I get this wrong? Let me know in the comments down below. If you've played this, let me know what I missed or how you guys did it. I would love to hear people's first-hand account or even third-hand count of what happened in this. Thank you. Have a great day and keep rolling those dice. Bye.